In 2013, a 92-year-old empire was dismantled by a single password and a smartphone. This is the story of how I used 7 rogue tweets to bring a retail giant to its knees. For nearly a century, HMV was the king of the high street, but they made one fatal mistake. They forgot that the person they were firing held the keys to their entire reputation. Since 1921, HMV was the undisputed king of the British high street. It was a cultural landmark where generations bought their very first records. With hundreds of locations and thousands of staff, the empire felt untouchable. But while the world moved online, the boardroom stayed frozen in the past. Behind the neon signs, the digital revolution was quietly turning their business model into a relic. The men in charge were far too arrogant to notice the ground shifting, assuming their legacy would protect them from the future. The men running HMV were relics who looked at the internet as a passing fad. Among them was Mark Hodgkinson, the marketing director, a man in a navy pinstripe waistcoat with receding salt and pepper hair. He understood profit margins, but had no idea how the modern world actually communicated. These executives operated from plush offices, comfortably detached from the reality of the shop floors. They didn't understand online culture, so they did something incredibly reckless. They outsourced their entire digital presence to their youngest, lowest-paid staff members. They treated platforms like Twitter as trivial toys rather than global megaphones. By handing over the master keys to their brand's public voice without a second thought, they created a massive vulnerability. They never realized that by ignoring the digital world, they were giving me the power to burn their reputation to the ground. It was a glaring blind spot born of corporate arrogance, and it was about to backfire. I watched them walk through the halls, completely unaware that they had already handed me the weapon that would finish them. On January 15, 2013, the music finally stopped. HMV collapsed into administration, and the corporate executioners from Deloitte moved in to pick apart the remains. Suddenly, 4,500 jobs were hanging by a thread. By January 31st, the atmosphere had turned toxic. Without any warning, over 60 of us were corralled into the Human Resources Department. It wasn't a meeting. It was a cold, calculated mass execution of our livelihoods. 190 redundancies were announced in the most ruthless way possible, tossing people out like trash. If you want to see what happens when the little guy finally bites back, you should hit that subscribe button right now. Because in that room of weeping employees, I stood there in my oversized mustard yellow sweater, my large round-rimmed glasses reflecting the light of my phone. I wasn't just another face in the crowd, and I wasn't going to pack my things and leave quietly. I had something they had forgotten about, and I was ready to use it against them. The callousness of that morning left the room in total shock. I saw grown men and women openly crying, wondering how they would pay their mortgages by the end of the week. Management stood at the front, reading from sanitized scripts that offered zero empathy. They treated us like rows on a spreadsheet, casually deleting lives to balance a budget they had ruined themselves. I watched the devastation with a growing sense of disgust. I had started as a humble intern and worked my way up to managing the company's entire social media presence. I knew the customers, and I knew how hard these people had worked to save a sinking ship. The executives thought they had neatly solved their problems by throwing us overboard. What they completely forgot was that my phone was still in my pocket, and I was still logged into the official HMV Twitter account. With over 63,000 followers waiting for an update, the executives were about to find out exactly what happens when you fire the only person who knows how to talk to the world. They had no idea that my thumbs were already moving across the cracked screen, typing the first words of a public nightmare they couldn't stop. As the cold, bureaucratic drone of the human resources representatives went on and on, something inside me finally snapped. I looked at my older colleagues, the ones burdened with heavy responsibilities, families, and crippling debts. They were entirely powerless, forced to swallow the indignity of this mass slaughter because they couldn't afford to burn any professional bridges. But I was only 21. I didn't have a mortgage hanging over my head, and I didn't have children to feed. I realized in that exact moment that I was actually the safest person in the room. I had absolutely nothing to lose, and I possessed the one weapon that could actually hurt the executives who were currently destroying my friends' lives. That weapon was the raw truth. The corporate machine expected us all to be good, quiet victims. They expected us to sign our severance papers, hand over our security badges, and disappear into the rainy London afternoon without making a single sound. They wanted to control the narrative by issuing a polished, sterile press release later that day about corporate restructuring. I refused to let them get away with it, and I refused to let them dictate the story of their own failure. I slipped my hand into my pocket, my fingers wrapping around my smartphone. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be a whistleblower. I didn't act erratically. I stood quietly in the back of the room, my face a mask of calm composure, while my mind raced through the logistics of what I was about to do. I knew that if I was going to strike, I had to do it before my access was inevitably revoked by the IT department. I opened the Twitter app, staring at the iconic pink and black dog logo of the official HMV account. I needed a way to organize the chaos, a beacon that would draw the internet's attention directly to the cruelty unfolding in real time. I decided that I needed a hashtag. My fingers hovered over the digital keyboard as I typed out the letters for HMV X Factor Firing. It was the perfect, biting commentary on the theatrical, reality show-style cruelty of the mass dismissal we were currently enduring. I knew the platform inside and out, because I was the one who had built its presence. I understood the algorithm, the peak engagement times, and exactly how quickly outrage could spread across the network if it was sparked correctly. I was essentially holding a digital match over a pool of public relations gasoline. The executives at the front of the room continued their monotonous speech, completely oblivious to the fact that the quiet young woman in the back was currently arming a weapon of mass reputational destruction. My first message was short, sharp, and devastatingly direct. I typed out a message saying that we were tweeting live from HR where we were all being fired, and I added that it was all very exciting. I hit send. Instantly, the tweet went live to 63,000 followers. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, the notifications began to trickle in. I saw a retweet here and a shocked reply there. But I wasn't done yet. I began documenting the brutal reality of the room, exposing the sheer scale of the executives' callousness. I tweeted again, telling the world that there were over 60 of us being fired at once. It was a mass execution of loyal employees who loved the brand. The trickle of notifications quickly turned into a flood. Journalists, customers, and rival companies began noticing the bizarre, unprecedented broadcast coming from the verified corporate account of a major British institution. The sheer brazenness of the executives' actions was now nakedly visible to the entire world. They weren't just laying people off, they were treating us like cattle, herding us into a room to be slaughtered, while the administrators from Deloitte coldly calculated their bonuses. The public reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Sympathy for the workers poured in, matched only by intense, vitriolic outrage directed at the HMV management. I had successfully bypassed the corporate filter, delivering the raw, ugly truth directly to the consumer base. Just as the hashtag began to aggressively trend across the United Kingdom, a ripple of panic finally reached the front of the room. A mid-level manager's phone buzzed aggressively, and then another one began to chime. The outside world was calling in, demanding to know why the official company account was having a spectacular, very public meltdown. The atmosphere in the Human Resources Department shifted instantly from depressing corporate theater to absolute, unadulterated chaos. The executives who had been so smug and entirely in control just moments before suddenly looked like deer caught in the headlights of a runaway freight train. They paused their rehearsed speeches, frantically whispering to one another as the realization of what was happening dawned on them. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I could feel the heat rising in my face. I was standing right there in the crowd, my thumbs flying across my cracked screen. I knew that every additional tweet was another nail in my own professional coffin, and for a split second, I wondered if I should just stop and save myself. But then I looked at the faces of my crying colleagues and I knew I couldn't walk away. If the bosses looked up or if they paid attention to anything other than their own panic, they would see me. The IT department was undoubtedly being scrambled to lock down the network, and I knew the window was violently slamming shut. The executives began scanning the crowd with furious desperation, hunting for the mole who was systematically destroying their reputations in real time. But I didn't flinch. Instead of hiding, I leaned into the chaos. I watched as the marketing director, Mark Hodgkinson, the man supposedly in charge of our entire digital strategy, began to completely lose his grip on reality. Here was the highest-paid marketing executive in the building, a man who commanded a massive salary to understand modern consumer engagement, and he was currently flailing like a helpless child. The sheer irony of the situation was almost too perfect, and it felt like a poetic culmination of years of executive ignorance. I listened intently, catching every panicked word exchanged between the scrambling bosses. I wasn't just a disgruntled employee anymore. I was a frontline war correspondent reporting from the trenches of a corporate disaster. I framed my next shot perfectly, preparing to deliver the ultimate, humiliating blow that would permanently cement management's utter incompetence into the annals of internet history. I knew exactly what I needed to hear him say, and I was just waiting for the moment he would finally crack under the pressure. I was ready to show the world exactly how little these people understood the technology they claimed to lead. The executives were now practically sprinting around the edges of the room, barking contradictory orders into their phones. They were calling Deloitte, calling the IT department, and calling anyone who could magically make the bad numbers on the screen go away. But the internet doesn't have an undo button. The more they panicked, the faster the retweets climbed. Major news outlets like the BBC and The Guardian were already picking up the story, broadcasting the HMV meltdown to millions of readers globally. The corporate fortress they had built, the carefully curated image of a respectable heritage brand, was burning to the ground in a matter of minutes. They had spent millions on marketing campaigns over the years, only to have their entire brand identity hijacked by my cracked smartphone screen. The defenses were completely shattered, and the men in the expensive suits were entirely naked before the mocking gaze of the global public. If you want to see how this digital revolution ends, you should subscribe and stay with me, because the most embarrassing part for management was just about to happen. I was about to post the quote that would define this entire crisis. I was standing there, watching the digital world collapse around them, when I heard it. It was the absolute, unparalleled moment of comedic gold I had been waiting for. Over the frantic shouting and the sound of people crying, I heard our marketing director, Mark Hodgkinson. This was the man responsible for our entire digital future, the one who took home the massive salary to lead us into the modern age. He was leaning over a colleague, his face pale and slick with sweat, desperately asking how to shut down Twitter. He didn't mean logging out or changing a password. He wanted to know how to kill the entire platform to make the mean words stop. I couldn't believe my luck. My thumbs were already moving before he even finished the sentence. I typed it out, my heart hammering against my ribs. Just overheard our marketing director ask, "How do I shut down Twitter?" I hit send and watched the little blue bird fly. It was a laser-guided missile aimed straight at the heart of their credibility. It didn't just show they were cruel, it proved they were hilariously, dangerously incompetent. They were trying to fight a digital war with analog weapons, completely baffled by the very technology that was currently dismantling their lives. It was the ultimate proof that the people running HMV into the ground had absolutely no business being in the room, let alone in charge of our futures. I knew the end was coming, so I made sure the final tweet was a defiant sign-off that they couldn't ignore. I wrote that under usual circumstances, we'd never dare do something like this. But when the company you love is being ruined by people who don't care, and the hard-working individuals who wanted to make HMV great again are being sacked, there seemed to be no other choice. With that, my rogue broadcast came to an end. 7 tweets. That was all it took to change everything. Eventually, management managed to wrestle control back from me. I watched them frantically deleting the posts, their fingers trembling as they tried to erase the evidence of their own embarrassment. But it was far too late for that. The internet never forgets, and screenshots had already immortalized their failure across the globe. Every single one of their humiliations had been archived from a dozen different angles. They had tried to quietly sweep 190 human lives under the rug, but instead, they were forced to stand in the blinding spotlight of global mockery. They had been spectacularly outmaneuvered by a 21-year-old girl who understood more about their business and her little finger than they did in their entire executive boardroom. It was a flawless act of poetic justice. The aftermath was nothing short of a public relations bloodbath. In the days that followed, HMV's management became a laughingstock in the business world, held up as the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when out-of-touch executives ignore the power of the people they employ. The brand's reputation was already battered by the bankruptcy, but now it was being dragged through the mud on a global scale. Those executives, the ones who had callously orchestrated our mass firings, found themselves entirely unable to control the narrative. They were forever associated with that frantic, less plea of asking how to shut down the internet. They were exposed as dinosaurs, completely unfit to navigate the digital landscape they claimed to rule. Their cruel efficiency in the human resources room had been entirely overshadowed by their staggering technological incompetence. It felt right that their professional legacies were permanently stained by a 21-year-old with a smartphone. I had watched them treat us like disposable numbers on a spreadsheet, but in the end, they were the ones who looked like relics of a bygone era. The very next day, I took to my personal account and told the world the truth. I stepped out from behind the corporate logo and revealed myself as the rogue tweeter. I didn't hide, and I certainly didn't apologize for what I had done. I explained that I simply wanted to show everyone how little management understood the true power of social media. My defiant stand paid off in ways I never could have imagined. Instead of being blacklisted as a corporate liability or a loose cannon, I was instantly hailed as a digital folk hero. Within hours of revealing my identity, I was absolutely swamped with lucrative job offers from top marketing agencies and tech companies who recognized my understanding of digital engagement. They didn't see a troublemaker. They saw someone who understood the modern world better than any executive in a pinstripe waistcoat ever could. I had turned my own firing into the greatest career move of my life. The implosion of HMV's corporate management serves as a brilliant reminder of how modern karma works. When you treat your hardest workers as disposable numbers, you'd better make sure you know who actually holds the keys to your digital megaphone. I proved that in the age of the internet, the little guy always has a voice, and that voice can be deafening. If you loved this story of corporate revenge, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like the video. Let me know in the comments what you would have tweeted if you were in my shoes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.